Hello there and welcome to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast, the show where we take all of the latest news, gossip and events in the world of Formula One, and we relay that back to you for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending on which platform, of course, you choose to follow us on. And guys, it is the summer break, and sadly, that tends to be the lull period in the F1 calendar that us F1 fans are now being starved of F1 content for the next couple of weeks until the Belgian Grand Prix at least. But don't despair, guys, whilst our favourite F1 stars, teams and media personnel are off on their summer breaks, deservedly, must be said, we are still going to be here bringing you great content via podcasts and great other videos as well. And joining me on this very special episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast is my co-host, as always, Mr. Courtney Pine. Courtney, first of all, how are you doing? Are you okay?
Yeah, doing well. I think it's going to be a bit boring for the next few weeks for obvious reasons, but very much excited for the second half of the season.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And of course, if the first half of the season is anything to go by, I'm sure we're going to be in for some enthralling action as the second half of the season gets underway very, very soon. And of course, guys, if you are watching us on YouTube, you will have already recognized a familiar person on the screen with us today. We are absolutely thrilled and delighted to have with us the brilliant WTF1 presenter, Mr. Matt Gallagher. Matt, first of all, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. How are you doing?
Well, first of all, no problem. It's fine for, to come and spend some time with other creators in the space. And no, it's my pleasure to come along. I'm very well. A little bit late to the podcast. I apologize. But apart from that, all good.
No, that's quite all right, of course. And obviously, Matt, if I know you're obviously a bit spare for time as well. So, of course, if you do have to leave us, then, don't worry about it. We'll be happy.
I won't just drop out the call. Don't worry. But we should have a decent enough amount of time.
Absolutely. But of course, Matt, obviously, you're very, very well known within the F1 community on social media, especially as the host at WTF1. Of course, the WTF1 podcast as well. Brilliant show with yourself, Katie and Tommy. Absolutely love it. Big, big fan of that. And of course, you've been a presenter with F1 Esports and also commentated on F1 TV. For lack of a better way of putting it, you're living the freaking dream, man. I mean, how awesome must that be?
Yeah, it's weird when you put it all or say it all out loud, or you see it on a piece of paper or whatever. It's a very strange thing from someone that kind of created his career from his bedroom, shouting at computer games. It's a bit strange. Feels very weird when it's been a massive whirlwind, to be honest. The last 4 or so years, it's been this kind of dream that I've not really been able to press the brakes on a little bit. Excuse the pun, because obviously Formula One, but I haven't been able to sort of slow down and just kind of appreciate it. But it is an amazing job and something that every single day I never take for granted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Of course, it inspired so many other content creators as well, ourselves included. I think it must be said to hear and listen to many content creators like yourself share your passion for Formula One. It just really made us feel like we need to get involved as well. So that here we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not to fanboy a little bit and embarrass you too much, but of course, I've been following you on your older channel, the old Matty G channel.
I hate that when people say that. Yeah, carry on.
I'll try not to embarrass you too much because I was going to say, obviously, I remember the first video I watched. I think it was the Christmas vlog back in 2012.
Oh, Jesus.
So, but
Adam's old school.
Yeah, perhaps a bit too much, but I won't embarrass you too much on that regard.
Oh, don't worry. I've embarrassed myself enough on the internet that nothing will really faze me anymore. So it's all good.
Well, you haven't heard me yet, so we'll have to see how that goes in the next 40 odd minutes or so. But I did want to ask you one question about your old channel, and you're probably going to hate me for this because it's something that you probably used to get asked a lot after you moved over with WTF1. A few of my followers have been asking about like highlights from a particular series, the YouTuber Championship. And I imagine you've heard that a lot. But what I want to ask you, Matt, is there a particular moment from that series that it lives in your mind forever, or something that you really, really enjoyed and couldn't stop enjoying again and again and again?
Well, yes. First of all, I do hear about that series far too often. Every single time, in fact, I meet up with fellow viewers that have watched me from the old days. Is when is YouTuber Championship coming back? We tried to bring it back in a karting form, and that lasted one episode before coronavirus hit. So I mean, there are obviously standout moments. I think it probably lives more in the people that watched it rather than myself who was involved in it. But I think the main thing for me was that I just really enjoyed the time that I spent with Ben, Arav, Noble, Harry, and Scott, of course, came into the series in the sort of last iteration of it. And it was just mates having fun. Obviously, I've had to tone down how I speak on camera, but I think that's no surprise with the amount of F-bombs that were flying about. So, you kind of mature and change. And, people ask, is it coming back? And, as much as I'd love to bring that sort of stuff back, people change. They, find different things interesting. And yeah, it was something that was fun at the time. And of course, a lot of people, it lives long in their hearts as something they'd love to see again. But, we all get older and a bit more wise and mature. So.
Yeah, I mean, watching some of your older videos, really, really enjoyed them. I know it's fair to say you were very animated on your commentary. But then that adds to, the value of the actual show. I mean, so many people that have obviously played F1 games online, myself included, there are always going to be moments that make you rage a little bit or get extra animated. And that's just all part of the fun. That's what we love about it. So always entertaining. I mean, for me personally, my favorite moment has to be when Ben capsized Nico Rosberg at Parabolica. That was absolutely brilliant moment. But of course, guys, if you haven't already, check out I think on the other channels, they do still have those. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. I did want to ask you one or two questions about WTF1, if I may, before we get into the mid-season review, because of course, that's the main reason why you are here to do the mid-season review with us. I was curious to ask about the experience that you had with F1 TV with Alex Jakes. Of course, you were doing some commentary last year and a little bit this year as well. First thing I've got to ask is, what was that like? What is Alex Jakes like?
Alex is amazing. I'll try and not fanboy too much over him, but he is an absolute pleasure to work with. I'd call him a friend because, we chat quite often. And yeah, he's brilliant. If it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity with F1 TV, to be honest. Obviously, it was kind of born from F1 esports and the stuff we did around the virtual Grand Prix and things like that. And obviously the right people took notice and opportunities sort of went from there. But Alex is brilliant. He's, in my eyes, the best commentator in the business. He has everything in terms of the way he can hype up a moment to being analytical and knowing when to, what piece of information to deliver to the audience. So, and also he doesn't leave the second commentator in the mud. If there's any slip ups or anything, he'll pick you up rather than put you down. And, that's not always the same with lead commentators, as much as I am myself more of a natural lead commentator than a second sort of analytical one. It's an absolute pleasure to work with him, or have worked with him on F1 esports. F1 TV, of course, I don't work with him anymore because he's moved over to Channel 4. But, he's a brilliant lad, and I think he's going to go very, very far.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Absolutely big fan of Alex myself. And there is certainly a way in which he describes races in a way that he almost as if he's telling a story. And he can capture, you don't even have to see any action. You can just capture your imagination and your attention just by what he says. And I think that's a skill that not many people have. And certainly something I think Alex, you'll see more and more with Alex in the future on F1 broadcasts. One more question I have before we do the mid-season review, if I may. I've always been, ever since I saw this video with WTF1, I was always been intrigued about perhaps one day asking about that experience. And that was when you got to drive the 2012 Renault RS01 at Silverstone. I mean, without mincing words, what was that experience like? That must have been absolutely incredible.
I think it's the RS01. That's the sports car. But the 2012 F1 car. It was. Yeah, it was. I mean, every time I think about that day, I can put myself back in the Formula One car, and I know exactly what kind of day it was. It was, the most unbelievable British day. 20 odd degrees, perfect for someone like me. And it was unbelievable. Obviously, it wasn't a particularly long experience in the Formula One car. Earlier on in that day, I was in the Formula Ford, just going around Silverstone to kind of, get my bearings and all that. And then at the end of the day, they put me out for not very long, of course, but it's a very expensive job, is going in a Formula One car. So, Yeah, it was absolutely mind-boggling. The acceleration, the brakes, I can't comment on as much because I was never going to risk anything on the brakes in a car that I didn't understand as much as I would have, been in an F1 game. That's not the same because the brake pedal doesn't move at all. You stamp on the brakes and there's no movement, so you don't really have any feel as to whether or not you're going to be binning it in the wall. So for me, I went full beans on the accelerator. Didn't hold anything back because I knew that if I did, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. And yeah, I mean, you can see on the onboards my head jolting every time I shifted up. It was ridiculous, the experience and the feeling of being so low to the ground but going so fast. It as much as there's not many people that can obviously compare that because these experiences are so few and far between. But you kind of get that extra bit of respect for the Formula One drivers that have to do this at even faster than what I was doing and racing other people as well. I was very much trying not to bin it at every single moment. So yeah, it was an unbelievable experience.
I mean, I'm guessing nobody sort of before you took off out of the garage, no one leaned into your ear and said, "Oh, Matt, by the way, if you break it, you buy it."
Yeah, well, I mean, God, I probably would have taken that chance anyway, knowing the massive F1 fan that I am. But there was actually the competition winner that went out before me. And funny story is I actually almost never didn't get to drive it because no one at the Renault team actually knew that I was going to be driving it after the competition winner. So when I went round to go, so is my go now? They were like, oh, no, we didn't know you were going in it. So at that point, from literally thinking I was going to drive a Formula One car the entire day, my world kind of came crashing down on me slightly because I didn't think I was then going to go in it. So it was a roller coaster of emotions that whole day. But getting into it, getting the whole sensation, sat down, in the cockpit. I mean, even just sat in the cockpit, I was absolutely cacking my pants. So yeah, it was unbelievable.
I mean, I can see that you're smiling, even reminiscing about it. It must have been some experience. I mean, me personally, I wouldn't know what to do if I was standing there and everyone's packing away and you're thinking, when do I get my go? You'd almost sort of like, I want to be polite, but this is like a life.
Yeah, there's time for being polite. That wasn't it. I was going to be asking someone,
Oh, man. Well, no, that's fantastic, Matt. And of course, so many people obviously love your content. And I think the best part about it is it just brings a new dimension to social media that so many fans can interact and engage with your content. And yourself and WTF1 have created this forum where so many people can now meet people that love F1. I imagine so many of us not fortunate enough to obviously have friends at a younger age that love Formula One. I mean, I was kind of lucky because obviously I met Courtney at a very young age when we were at school together and we built a friendship based off of Formula One. But I imagine for so many people that, and I think yourself, you've mentioned a few times as well on your social media that it was very, very hard to meet like-minded people or build relationships with people that liked F1 because there just weren't many around at the time.
No, I mean, I had no friends that liked Formula One. I did have some friends, surprisingly. But yeah, none of them liked Formula One. And, I'd be watching races with my dad and that was about it, really. So I didn't have F1 friends, really, until I started playing the F1 game. And then one of my best friends, Jody, I met him playing the F1 game and we've been, best friends ever since. So it's crazy how things like that can bring people together. Another person, Alex Gillen, there's a few YouTubers out there, of course, Ben, Scott, Arav, etc. These guys I've hung out with away from Formula One gaming or whatever as well. So yeah, it's a nice feeling to know that you can actually speak to some people that like Formula One, and having the Twitter following that I have now, it feels weird to be able to kind of express my thoughts of what's going on in a race to other people that can comment and reply to it. Because, back in the day, I'd just watch the Formula One race and not have anyone to discuss it with. So yeah, times have changed quite drastically.
Yeah, I can imagine the time, obviously, when we were all growing up watching Formula One, that you and I in particular probably enjoy the Schumacher era a bit more than others probably did. But yeah, I can't imagine many people get on board with that. But of course, Matt, you're here with us to go over the mid-season review and reflect a little bit on what we've seen so far this season and perhaps cast a few predictions of what we're expecting for the second half. So with that in mind, of course, Courtney, I'm going to bring you into this conversation as well now. I suppose the big talking point that we have to begin with is the developing battle now between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. Of course, after the Hungarian Grand Prix, assuming that the appeal to, or the disqualification for Sebastian Vettel is upheld following the Aston Martin protest, currently right now, Lewis Hamilton leads the championship by 8 points. And it's been a very strange season so far. We started off with the two of them neck and neck at Bahrain. Of course, Lewis winning that outing And then, of course, Max Verstappen responding in kind. And then, of course, after the Spanish Grand Prix, it just felt that Mercedes and Lewis in particular had a bit of an advantage over Red Bull when you consider the whole package. But since then, Red Bull went on an absolute tear, winning, I think, 5 races in a row. Max, of course, winning 4 of those. But in the last few races, Max has had quite a bit of misfortune. Of course, we're not going to dissect the Verstappen-Hamilton incident at Copse Corner. I think that's been done to death, literally.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not going to. Don't worry, Matt. I'm not going to ask you. A couple of weeks ago, I asked Aldous about this, and I'm pretty sure he was almost like hovering over cancelled channel because he was worried about the backlash. Just because he said, "Oh well, I'm not quite sure." Yeah, but no, so I'm not going to do that to you, of course. You'll be leaving a lot sooner from this podcast, I'd imagine, than you intended if otherwise. But Courtney, the last couple of weeks, of course, Max Verstappen had a bit of misfortune and has lost a lot of points, to some degree, not to his own doing, to a point now where Lewis Hamilton is leading this championship, where Max could have easily been leading it by maybe 50, even 60 points at the best estimate. So going into this summer break now, reflecting on what's happened the first half of the season, are we going to expect a more fiery battle between these two in the second half of the season, not to mention the fact that Lewis tends to be a bit stronger in the second half of the season?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm very happy with where the championship is at. As a Lewis fan, I'm obviously happy about that, but I'm more happy as a fan of Formula One itself because we've actually got a proper battle on our hands. I was worried, particularly during that double header in Austria, I was worried that the championship could well be done and dusted, but obviously, with a little bit of misfortune for Max, the championship seems to be well and truly on. I think the thing I find most interesting is actually the most tension we are probably seeing in this championship is actually between the team principals and not the drivers themselves. I think the sort of war of words between Christian Horner and Toto Wolff has probably been the biggest highlight of the season so far, really.
And it doesn't seem like that's going to go either. It does seem to provide its own sub-story, if you like, to the battle that is actually meant to be taking place that we're paying interest to. Matt, obviously, I've got to ask you this. As I said, I had Aldous on a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him this question. I want to ask you, with Christian Horner and Toto Wolff, their relationship obviously souring week by week by the sounds of it, we thought it might be interesting for F1 to try and facilitate a charity boxing match between the two. I'm curious who you think would win between the two, Christian or Toto?
Toto would absolutely demolish Christian Horner. That man is a man mountain. Have you seen him in Drive to Survive and him working out? Like, he is a beast. There is no contest. Horner be out in 30 seconds.
Yeah, I kind of envisioned Horner to have a bit of the Scrappy Doo vibe, and then you just got Horner like Scooby just holding him back at arm's length. But yeah, the guy's an absolute beast. I certainly wouldn't want to fight him. I think I'd have to get Christian a stepladder to take Toto on first. But obviously with the serious battle between Max and Lewis, of course, yourself have obviously had so many people weighing in on this topic at the moment. I mean, first of all, have you enjoyed this battle so far this season? Has it been refreshing for Lewis to have a really feisty challenge for the championship, perhaps one he's not had since his teammate Nico Rosberg in 2016?
Yes. Yeah, I've been really enjoying it. I think it's great for Formula One that, more than anything, Mercedes have been pegged back rather than Red Bull maybe finding stuff with the slight tweak to the regulations coming into this year. So obviously it's worked a treat because we've got 8 points separating the two after 11 rounds. That's not something I don't think any of us expected coming into 2021. So yeah, I mean, it's brilliant for the sport. I've not been liking what's been going on social media personally. I think it's been pretty disgusting, really. A lot of the stuff that's been happening, all the abuse being thrown around to Lewis, especially, and it's not something you want to see. I don't know why it's really happening as much. Maybe it's because two massive fan bases are clashing. But I think you just have to turn off Twitter and enjoy what Formula One is right now, which is brilliant racing, and you don't know who's going to be quickest coming into the next race. And of course, we've had the likes of Hungary where Ocon won, and you had Perez winning for the first time ever in Azerbaijan, as much as that was Verstappen having his tyre blowout. But overall, the season's been awesome. We've had some amazing races. This Hamilton versus Verstappen rivalry should be cherished rather than mudslinging between fans. Just enjoy it. We've not had this for so many years, especially between two different teams. It's what's not to love.
No, absolutely right. And Courtney, I can see you nodding your head because obviously as a fan, you've mentioned on the podcast a few times since that British Grand Prix that, it kind of sours All of this abuse that's going Lewis's way, you know, is so inappropriate, and it is disgusting. Matt's absolutely right with that. I don't think we should sugarcoat it at all. It just seems like it could potentially sour an otherwise legendary battle that we could potentially look back on in the same way that we look back on Senna Prost or Alonso Schumacher or Schumacher Hill, for example. You know, those kind of battles that we remember through F1 folklore. I mean, what would you say for the second half of the season if you were a fan, and what would you be worried if these two clash again? Because it almost seems inevitable that they probably will, based on what's already happened so far.
Yeah, no, I definitely like the second what Matt has said, because, you know, I'm a big fan of football as well as Formula One, but I've never really engaged with football social media because it always has been a lot more toxic in comparison to Formula One. Like Formula One, the communities always seem to be a lot more open-minded, friendly. But yeah, this season I've seen, since this battle's like kind of heated up between Lewis and Max, it's definitely been, as Matt said, I think some of the behaviour that's been seen has been disgusting. We've even seen it in the comment sections of our own podcast. I mean, some of the debates, it just seems to be a lot of hatred towards these drivers, and I don't know. It seems that the Formula One community is becoming a little bit more like the football community this season, and I really am hoping it comes to an end. But I do think, as much as we've enjoyed the war of words between Red Bull and Mercedes, I do think that some of the people higher up need to understand their behaviour and the things they say when they're being recorded do have consequences. I just hope that everyone's a little bit more mindful going into the second half of the season, because we don't want to see a great championship battle between an all-time F1 great and somebody who will probably go on to be one as well. We want to be seeing it all being sorted out on track rather than on social media, because it ruins the spectacle for everyone, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And of course, hopefully the second half of the season, we will get more of the on-track battles between the two of them. And at the end of the day, we might have our foots in certain camps. I mean, loads of people say that they have to be impartial, etc. But of course, we all have preferences as fans in F1. That's just natural. But I think we can all agree, as long as we see a battle that lasts to the very last lap of the last corner at the last race and the best man wins, that's always a win for everybody. So hopefully we get more of that rather than some of the stuff we've had on social media the last couple of weeks. Matt, I wanted to draw a little emphasis now to the role that Bottas and Perez have played so far this season. Now, in a weird way, you could argue that they've kind of had their own independent fights, not necessarily with each other, but with their own sort of battles that are kind of irrespective of what's gone on with their teammates. So you've got Bottas on one hand, who seems to be fighting for his seat every time he sets in the car. And clearly that is having an impact on him at the moment, where he's not able to deliver what he can. Of course, what happened at Hungary was a complete disaster if you were managing Valtteri Bottas's career, considering what happened to him. And of course, George Russell, who is fighting for his seat as well at Mercedes. And then, of course, you have Sergio Perez, who he's had a very up and down season. Of course, this season has been very much about trying to play the supportive role to Max, as many has touted. But he had his biggest moment winning in Baku, of course, picking up where obviously Max lost out because of the tyre issues. But since then, he's kind of not really been a part of that battle with Mercedes, or in particular with Lewis Hamilton or Bottas. So it kind of leaves a lot more questions than answers for both drivers at the moment. How do you sort of sum up their season so far? And obviously, what do you think they need to do to try and create a more positive impact for their respective teams?
I mean, in a nutshell, drive faster. That might help. Yeah, it's been a pretty poor season for both of them when you look at it as a whole. The fact that both of them are behind Lando in the championship is, quite frankly, ridiculous when Lando's in a McLaren. But that McLaren has been quite quick a few races this season. So, yeah, obviously Bottas has had some bad luck, but overall, you have to say that Valtteri's just not been on the same level, especially in qualifying, that he has been in the previous years, which has enabled him to have a chance of beating Lewis and getting right in the mix of things. It just seems like he's lost a little bit of that edge in qualifying that he had before. Perez, of course, you have to kind of take into account that he is moving to a new team, and the first sort of 5, I think, before Azerbaijan, all those races before then were very underwhelming from Sergio. And of course, you can't really mention Hungary because obviously he got taken out and things like that. I expected a little bit more from Sergio. I'm not saying that he should be right there with Verstappen, because I don't think he ever was going to be, but I expected a bit more. Maybe that's more to do with the Red Bull itself than it is Sergio, because we've seen before already with Gasly and with Albon that clearly there's something maybe fundamentally wrong within the team. But still, to be behind Norris and maybe not a little bit closer, considering especially the amount of bad luck that Verstappen's had this season, to be, if you're Perez 83 points behind Max, and Max has had a few very bad races, it's not unforgivable, but it's certainly going to be something that Red Bull will be discussing when they decide who they're going to sign again for next year and beyond.
And the assumption would be, I think for a lot of people, ever since he won the race in Baku, that Perez probably was going to get another year at least, and hopefully then we would see more from Sergio Perez. One question I would want to ask you, Matt, while you're here is, with Sergio Perez, if he ends up in a position at the end of the season where he is equally as far behind Max, maybe even more so at the end of the season, and Red Bull lose the Constructors' Championship by the smallest margins, do you feel that Red Bull may be a bit more hasty perhaps to review their driver lineup and think, actually, maybe this isn't going to work out with Perez and maybe we need to consider our options? Or do you feel that perhaps that might be a bit premature this season?
It depends who's available, really, because going into next year with the changes in technical regulations, such big changes as well, you kind of almost need experience, and Sergio has that. So for me, I think Red Bull would be better off keeping Sergio rather than doing musical chairs and bringing back Alex Albon or bringing in another junior like Liam Lawson or whatever. I can't imagine he'll go straight to Red Bull, but someone that they maybe aren't familiar with, it almost seems like they just need to invest a bit more into a driver, especially of Sergio's experience, to not expect results straight away. As much as, I've just said that he was a little bit underwhelming, and I still think he is. I think there's maybe almost a little bit too much expectation within the Red Bull team for that second seat. So for me, I think Sergio has done a job, not as good a job as I expected, but I expect him to continue to have better performances by the end of this season. I still expect him to be over 100 points behind Max, if not more. But what are Red Bull expecting from that second seat? That's where they've got to maybe manage what they really want from them.
No, absolutely. And I think so far this season, we haven't seen enough of that from Perez. And I think it's right to point out that despite winning that race in Baku, that's probably one of the few occasions where Perez has really shown his true capabilities in that Red Bull. And it could be a fundamental issue with the car that so many drivers, other than Max, just seem to struggle with. Courtney, on the Bottas topic, of course, it's the case of will he, won't he for 2022? Will George Russell get the nod to join them next season? Clearly has affected him in some degree, but if Mercedes have already made a decision or are about to during this summer break, and it doesn't turn out that Valtteri Bottas will be staying next season, he will in fact leave the team, could that be a potential catalyst for Bottas perhaps either improve and perhaps, finish on a high to attract interest from other teams? Or do you feel that this could be a decision that may cost Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship against Red Bull this season?
I think it's more likely to put in the performances to get the interest, but they must know what's going on behind the scenes. I've had a feeling that Bottas must have known about his future for at least a few weeks now, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's a straight swap between him and George and he goes back to Williams. That wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. So if he does already have his future sorted, then he might lose a little bit of motivation. But he's always seemed to have done a pretty professional job for Mercedes. He's always been called the perfect wingman. But I do think, I think he'll continue to do the job for Mercedes. But his form hasn't really been over the course of the season. It hasn't been good enough, and he knows it. And it's probably going to cost him his seat. I'll be very surprised if George isn't there next season.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Matt, I'm tempted to ask you, what do you think? Do you think it's going to be George Russell next season, or do you feel that Mercedes may continue to hold on to Bottas for at least another year?
It's just, I just constantly change my mind on this subject. I, like every single race, it's something else. I was always leaning more towards Mercedes keeping Bottas. Now I'm probably very much on the fence, and it could go either way. It really does depend on what Mercedes are prioritizing here. If it's the fact that they want something safe for next year going into the new regs, they want, again, like a really experienced teammate partnership of Hamilton and Bottas, then they stick with that, especially with the fact that they've got so many changes coming up. But on the other side, George isn't going to wait forever to get this Mercedes seat. And of course, going into next year's regulations, we don't know that Mercedes are going to be the fastest car. They could easily be the third, fourth, fifth fastest car. They get the least amount of wind tunnel time, whereas Ferrari have quite a lot. And, you have to think that maybe the pecking order will be changed a bit. So, of course, Russell and Bottas both want to go to Mercedes, in my opinion. They want to stay there. It's the championship winning team, and you'd be stupid to write them off going into next year. But it's so difficult because then you've got Russell versus Hamilton. Russell's going to want to prove himself. He's going to want to win titles. Then you're up against Lewis. It's so difficult. There's so many factors that it really does depend on which one you focus on. And you go, well, actually, it could be Bottas. Or actually, it could be Russell. For me, I still lean towards Mercedes keeping Bottas, I think, with all things said and done, just purely because I don't think Mercedes are really one to take a risk. And also, a fully British lineup doesn't really benefit Mercedes as a brand. So there's all kinds of things that you take into account here that maybe will swing things one way or another.
So that's interesting because I was expecting you to say Russell all day long, clearly. But no, that is true. I think, when you look at Mercedes, you have to consider, the German aspects of it. I remember there was a time where they wanted to consider Nico Hülkenberg to join them to replace Michael Schumacher. And of course, they went with Lewis. And obviously the rest is history on that one. So there is that element to consider as well. I'm kind of on the fence as well, because I just feel like, you've got Bottas, what you've got in him as an entity, he's going to be able to provide you relatively consistent performances. This year, obviously, it's been a bit of a struggle, but there's always that risk element with George Russell. Will he turn out to be as good as we think he will be? I suppose until you do it, you're never really ever going to know. So maybe that's what is tempting for them as well. But I'm being mindful of time, of course, Matt, because I've only got you for a certain amount of time. But let's talk about McLaren and Ferrari. Obviously, both of them at this point, assuming Vettel's penalty is upheld, are on 163 points each. Now, there's two ways you can look at this. You can look at Ferrari obviously not capitalizing on certain opportunities that they've been afforded, but in some races they've been brilliant. But then on McLaren's side, you've got a driver in Daniel Ricciardo who has been had flashes of the Daniel Ricciardo we expect, but not quite performing at this point to the level we expect him to. And then the brilliance of Lando Norris that kind of merges it all together to the point where both teams are level at the moment. How have you seen that battle going on between those two teams at the moment?
Well, I mean, you say two teams. I think it's Lando Norris versus Ferrari at the moment. Ricciardo's down in 9th position with 50 points, the same as Gasly. And of course, you've got Norris up there with 113. So it's really disappointing on Danny Rick's front, personally. I thought that he was going to beat Lando this year. I thought he was going to comprehensively beat him, to be honest. I thought maybe he'd have a slow start, but then he'd get into his stride. But it's almost like that Ricciardo Verstappen, where Verstappen was beating Ricciardo at Red Bull before he left. So it's almost worse, actually, in fact, the pace difference between the two. And it's such a shame because I love Danny Rick to pieces. I think he's one of the nicest people in the paddock. It's just such a shame to not see the performances coming out of that McLaren. And clearly, he's just not confident. You see the free practice graphics coming up. He's earlier on the brakes than Norris. He's clearly not got that confidence that Lando has. And then on the flip side, in Ferrari, I think Carlos Sainz has been unbelievable considering he's moved to a new team. Charles Leclerc is very much one of the hot talents in Formula One, and to be able to match him in certain areas, of course, maybe not right at the beginning of the season, but he's certainly shown, flashes of brilliance as Carlos, and he's actually ahead of him in the championship standings, which of course, you have to take into account Leclerc being yeeted in the last race, but that is still very close between the two. So Ferrari versus McLaren, I think McLaren will probably be kicking themselves more because they've had some serious pace in that car, but Danny Rick hasn't been able to extract it. Whereas Ferrari, of course, have had a few random pole positions with Charles Leclerc, which is out of absolutely nowhere, wasn't it? But I think overall, maybe McLaren may feel that they haven't had as many points secured as they may have should.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm tempted to ask, Matt, obviously looking into the second half of the season, perhaps with both teams, perhaps learning the lessons respectively of where they've sort of fallen short and obviously what they need to do for the second half of the season. But I know you have a bit of a rapport with Lando and also especially with Charles as well, working with WTF1. But I'm kind of tempted, which one of the two do you think is going to come out on top between those two? Not necessarily constructors, but this battle between those two.
It's difficult to say. I think Leclerc is a slightly better driver than Norris overall. I think obviously Leclerc, I think the main difference is Charles has had a car to be able to prove that he can win races. Lando, of course, has been putting that McLaren in places it shouldn't have been, but there's that one tiny step that you have to show that you can win a race. I mean, Ocon's been able to do it in an Alpine, which I don't think any of us expected from the Hungarian Grand Prix. As soon as Lando and McLaren have that car, we'll know if he's absolutely 100% the real deal, and we can put him in the Verstappens, the Hamiltons, the Leclercs of this world. In terms of this fight, it's very difficult. I think maybe McLaren seem to be on the ascendancy a bit more than Ferrari, and I think McLaren will finish P3 in the constructors personally, but it's going to be an absolute dogfight. And, you know, if we have a few more Hungarian Grand Prix, anything can happen to change that those standings.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I'm loving the battle between McLaren and Ferrari. There's very much a nostalgic feeling to it. Yeah. I just wish it was for P1 and 2 rather than 3 and 4, but we might get that next season. We'll have to wait and see. Courtney, of course, I've got to ask you as well. How do you see this battle going between those two teams?
Yeah, I think Lando's just been absolutely amazing. I think he's going to be the difference in this battle. But yeah, I'd just like to mention Carlos Sainz as well. I think I didn't expect him to gel as well as he has at Ferrari. I think we've seen in the past, particularly with Sebastian Vettel, how difficult it can be. If you're struggling at a team like Ferrari, it does show. But he's settled in. I think it has helped that he's gone into a team that doesn't have a race-winning car. So it has given him that chance to settle in. And if Ferrari are more competitive next season, I think he'll be there or thereabouts. I think he has the ability to do it. But yeah, I think when it comes to that battle, Lando, there seems to have a little something special about him this season, and I think we could be seeing a couple of surprise results. It wouldn't surprise me if he had another race like Hungary. I reckon Lando would sort of be in the running to win a race, because I think, as Matt has already said, he's just missing. I think once he gets that race-winning experience, I think that could really take him to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite intriguing to kind of imagine an alternative scenario where Lando and Leclerc respectively weren't bold, for lack of a better way of putting it, by Stroll and Bottas respectively. So, you know, so many drivers in that race could have laid a claim to say, no, I could have won if this didn't happen. But, you know, that's Formula One for you. Matt, obviously, I know you're going to be leaving us in a few minutes, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on Alpine this season. Obviously, Ocon won that race this weekend in Hungary. It's an incredible Grand Prix and an incredible moment for a young man who's been through so much. I mean, are you expecting this potentially to be a catalyst for him moving forward, or are you feeling perhaps this could be the highlight in a season where he's had a tough battle with his teammate Fernando Alonso, as it seems?
I'd love to say that I think that it will change his fortunes around and he'll be a different Ocon and taking it to Alonso, because quite frankly, he hasn't been able to in pretty much since he re-signed his contract. Everything seemed to go down the toilet a little bit for Esteban. I'd love to say that. I think it was very much more of a right moment, right time sort of jobby for Ocon where he won this race. I don't expect him to be beating Alonso many times for the rest of the season, you know, because as much as, you know, there's momentum, there's all this, that, and the other. Fundamentally, I think Esteban has been missing something in that Alpine. But, you know, of course, you know, he made the most of it in Hungary, and I'm not taking anything away from him because he won the race. You know, he had to beat a 4-time world champion in an Aston Martin. But yeah, I don't see it massively changing his fortunes for the rest of the year. And, you know, I fully expect something like we go to Spa and he doesn't make Q3. You know, that's the sort of thing that I'd fully expect. And yeah, it's sad because Ocon's a lovely guy, but he has been missing just that little bit, which we maybe saw against Perez when they were Racing Point and all the other different alterations. He was maybe a little bit more, I guess. Yeah, he was a bit more exciting then than he has been so far with Alpine, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And quickly on Alonso, of course, I remember when Michael Schumacher came back to the sport in 2010, and like many Michael Schumacher fans, I was absolutely gushing at the opportunity to see Michael once again in a Formula One car, and was hoping that he might be successful again. Obviously, it didn't quite turn out the way that we hoped, but in Fernando, I think it's fair to say that despite a few slow races to start with, he's really found the form perhaps that he had when he was at McLaren before he left. I mean, how excited have you been by Fernando's upturn in form this season, especially after what he did at Hungary?
Yeah, it could easily be, you know, the same as Michael Schumacher's comeback, where it was very underwhelming. But then, you know, you look at what Nico Rosberg did at least, took to Lewis Hamilton. And you kind of think, well, actually, Michael Schumacher was pretty damn good considering how old he was. He wasn't massively off what Rosberg was managing. And then Rosberg managed to get a championship off Hamilton. So, you do the comparisons and you think, well, actually, Schumacher didn't do too bad of a job. And I think Alonso's doing a great job as well. As much as he might lose that extra edge that he had when he was 10 years younger, he doesn't lose the racecraft. And I think that's what we saw at the Hungarian Grand Prix. You don't forget how to defend, especially when you're Fernando Alonso. And I think I tweeted, I said, I would not choose anyone else to defend from Lewis Hamilton than Fernando Alonso. And, he showed that he's still got that tenacity. And he'd be like, I don't care, you're a 7-time world champion. You're not going around my outside. And it's that kind of, that presence on the track that Lewis also knew Fernando had, and that maybe almost caused him to, make a few mistakes that Fernando said after the race that Lewis was making, and that's why he didn't get through. So, yeah, Fernando is one of those characters that I'm very happy to see on the grid. I was a little bit skeptical coming into the season, but, once you see the performances like this, you realise why so many people love watching Fernando on track.
I mean, the guy is absolute box office. I love watching Fernando. And that battle with Lewis is absolutely brilliant. It reminded me very much of the battle himself and Michael had at Imola back in 2005, I believe it was. You shall not pass. It was worthy of Lord of the Rings. I'm just mindful of the time, Matt. Are you able to do the song, or have you got to shoot off?
No, I've got to get my mop chopped, unfortunately. And that's the time, 6:30, unfortunately. So, I'm going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, guys.
Well, no, you've been...
Thanks for coming on, Matt. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for coming on, and I really, really appreciate your time. Of course, guys, I will leave a link in the description for the WTF1 channel that Matt presents and features on, of course. Let's help them get to 1 million subscribers if we can.
Yes, please. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks again.
Later.
Cheers. Bye.
And then there were two. And so guys, of course, that was Matt Gallagher. And as I said, absolutely mega for him to come on this show. Of course, the 100th episode, if I haven't already mentioned. It's crazy to think, Courtney, that we've been doing this now for 18 months. And it's absolutely insane that there are people out there that literally tune into our content and interact with us, whether they like it or not. Of course, we aim to entertain and obviously, I suppose, be a little bit informative based on our opinions in F1. But, how has the experience been for you? Because obviously I've said a lot and a lot of people know I'm quite vocal on this, but I'm quite intrigued to get your take on this journey so far.
Well, I think today sums it up. I've gone from doing farming to, listening to one of the biggest names in the Formula One social media circle. So, it's very interesting, but I think I think a lot of work has gone into this project. I think props to you, Adam. You've done a lot for this channel, and it's great. It's great to be in this position where we can talk to people of Matt's caliber.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And hopefully we'll have many more guests like that in the future. But guys, of course, we're going to continue with this review. Obviously, we weren't able to have Matt with us for the whole episode, which is a shame. But, it was absolutely fantastic that he could give us his time as much as he could, of course. And hopefully the haircut that he does have works out for him, or that he enjoys it. Not that I'm one to comment. I mean, look at my barnet, if those of you watching on YouTube. But can't all rock a decent do like Courtney does, of course.
I'd like to mention Fernando Alonso. I want to talk about Fernando Alonso.
Yes. Let's get back to the review.
I want to see Alpine do a brawl next season when these big regulation changes, because I'd love nothing more than to see Fernando Alonso battling with the likes of Hamilton, Verstappen and Leclerc. For me, as a fan of the sport itself, I'd love nothing more than to see the four of them. Obviously, I've been chuck Lando in the mix, why not? But it'd be fantastic to see the elite drivers battling on a regular basis, because I think what we saw between Lewis and Alonso was kind of what we've missed for a few years with Alonso. He hasn't had an opportunity to showcase his talent for quite a few years now. So it kind of gave us a taste of what we've been missing, really. Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that in F1 that Fernando is quite unique. He really brings that, as I said, the box office element to it. The way that he drove against Lewis Hamilton, you'd almost think there's no one else on that grid that would do that. Of course, Alonso had fresher tyres, so he was able to defend and make the Alpine literally as wide as a couple of London buses during rush hour. But it just really felt quite refreshing to see that, and that as brilliant as Lewis was, that it was a case of it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to do something special to overtake me. And I'm hoping for the rest of the season we see more of that Fernando. But
I'm kind of hoping next season that Alpine can produce a really good car. Maybe Fernando can compete for race wins and championships. I think we've seen on merit so far that he's certainly got it in him. And if he ever finds himself in that position like Ocon did, you can bet your bottom dollar that he's going to be able to capitalize on it or make a good go of it.
Yeah, I think it's the main reason why he come back and why he went to Alpine of all teams, because, you know, obviously he won 2 championships with, obviously this team is formerly known as Renault, and he has a lot of good memories of that team. There's probably some faces in the background that are still there from 2005, 2006. And he has gone there with next season in mind. Yeah. That was the whole reason why he's come back, hoping that they can produce a car that can at least compete for wins. And yeah, as I said, I'm really hoping that he's in. I just want to be seeing the likes of him, Leclerc, who have really been missing out on the opportunity to show what they're capable of. You know, as great as it has been to see Lewis dominate, I'm always kind of in two minds about it. There's the Lewis Hamilton fan, and then there's a fan of Formula One, because I'm both. You know, it's so easy to think, oh, he supports Lewis, he's a fanboy, but I love the sport. I love the sport, and I want to be seeing the best going up against the best, and Alonso and Leclerc, and I think Lando's almost ready as well. You want to be seeing these guys compete for championships. I know F1 is primarily more to do with the car, so we don't always get the wish of seeing the best drivers coming up against each other. But yeah, I just hope one day we get to see all these drivers dicing on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's something we're going to hopefully get in the future years. Obviously, if the regulations have the desired effect, hopefully we will get that between those drivers. There's certainly this season, Matt was saying earlier, of course, that Mercedes were pegged back by the new regulation. Of course, Aston Martin have had a history of complaining about this throughout the season. I'm not sure how that protest is going, if that's even still going on. But that being said, I just feel that, it really has been good for the sport this season, regardless of if it delivers a shock outcome or if it does hurt Mercedes to a point where they don't win the championship. I think for the sport, for a spectacle, it's a lot better than I think what we were expecting was basically a repeat of last season when Mercedes had practically wrapped the championship up by Turkey. It was just ridiculous. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But let's move on, of course, to the other two teams in this battle of best of the rest, if you like, and that's Aston Martin and AlphaTauri. Two teams who... there's quite a mixed bag of stories going on there, because we've got an AlphaTauri, of course, Pierre Gasly, who has been pretty solid all season. I wouldn't say there's been too many outstanding performances in races per se, but he's always been a real figure in qualifying. And then we've got Yuki Sonoda as well, who again has had his moments, but have been a lot more few and further between than Gasly. But he's kind of struggled as to a degree where, some people have been talking about his future next season. Will he still be at AlphaTauri? Have Red Bull had enough? How would you assess AlphaTauri's season so far, Courtney?
They started the season with a lot of promise. They seem to have tailed off a bit. Maybe they're one of the teams that very much have their minds on next season. But then I don't really see that as much of an excuse, because most teams are pretty much have their minds on next season. They've been outdeveloped by some other teams. I think the likes of Aston Martin in particular have caught up with them, which is a shame for them. But yeah, Pierre Gasly's been he's particularly qualifying. He's always put himself in a decent position. I think you're right about Yuki Sonoda. I think he's picked his form up a little bit, but I think he's probably one of the drivers that will be worried about his seat next season, because the AlphaTauri, obviously with it being in a Red Bull program, there's always obviously a lot of interest in that seat. You've got the likes of Albon, Liam Lawson, of course, will probably be interested in that seat as well. So I think it's going to be tough. But Yuki Tsunoda is going to have to pick up his form if he wants to keep that seat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think he's too worried about that yet, but obviously this is a learning experience as well for Yuki, but there is an expectation. And AlphaTauri, of course, started the season thinking that they may end up being the best of the rest or have the third best car on the grid. And at times they have been, at least on outright pace, challenging McLaren and Ferrari. But for whatever reason, they've just not been able to capitalize on that during the race, despite the best efforts of Pierre Gasly, who's been a solid 8 or 9 out of 10 for most of this season. But it just hasn't really translated into points at that upper echelon, if you like, if the grid. It's more about trying to fend off the likes of Aston Martin and Alpine. And even then, you'd say that those two teams have really had the better rub of the green compared to them. Aston Martin, again, considering that the start of the season didn't really work out well for him owing to the issues he had in testing and, the slow start that he had. Sebastian Vettel has really found his form again. And other than the odd slip up, literally at Silverstone, he's been a very solid performer. And even if the DQ is upheld, that's not on him. That's on the team. So overall, how would you rate Seb's season so far, Courtney? Because I'd say been pretty good, at least a 7 out of 10 from Seb.
I think we're seeing Sebastian Vettel that is in so much of a better place mentally. He's definitely settled in well, Aston Martin. There's a couple of things that I've noticed. It showcases that he's in a good mind. The way that he was cleaning up after the British Grand Prix. Obviously that went viral. And there's also a video afterwards of after the Hungarian Grand Prix before, I can't remember. There was this video, it was a TikTok of all the drivers like driving out in their luxury sports cars, and then there's Sebastian Vettel cycling away. And it's for me, that's just another example of him just being so comfortable within himself. He's going to do things his way. He's not going to sort of follow in the way other drivers have. I think the social media thing's another thing. He's kept himself away from that. He's very, very much happy in his own bubble, and that's the Martin have made him feel even more comfortable in that. Because with Ferrari, you're under so much pressure. And I think that kind of environment doesn't really suit somebody with Sebastian Vettel's character. And I think the environment at Aston Martin suits him a lot more because he seems a lot more comfortable, not so much pressure. And Aston Martin are one of the teams we need to be keeping an eye on because there's a lot of investment going in that team. They have a lot of ambition. And if Aston Martin have a good enough car, maybe I should have put Sebastian Vettel in that conversation earlier on when I was talking about drivers getting back to their best. Aston Martin could be another team that put a good car together. And we know once Sebastian has a good car, he can do great things with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if it wasn't for that DQ that he received, that would have been much further up in the standings compared to where they are provisionally at the moment. And I suppose in Aston Martin's case, it's kind of a similar thing for AlphaTauri that, of course, Lance Stroll has had a few good days this season. Of course, he scored the first points for Aston Martin earlier in the season when Vettel was finding his feet in the team. But now that Seb has definitely gone up to a new level, more like the Sebastian Vettel that we know and love, it seems that Stroll has been perhaps limited a little bit and not really stepped up as much as Seb has. Do you feel that he will look at this summer break and think that perhaps that's something he needs to focus on for the second half of the season, be more of a factor? Because right now, you'd have to say they probably need him to do that if they're going to win this battle with Alpine and AlphaTauri.
Yeah, with Lance Stroll, he almost had his moment of glory in Turkey last year. He's leading a race for a good amount of time. After that, he seems to have been a bit flat. I don't know how he feels about Sebastian Vettel's upturning form. I think he had a little bit of leeway when Sebastian was sort of settling in and he struggled a little bit to start with. But now Sebastian's picked up his form. Drivers always compare themselves to their teammates. And, a lot is said, obviously, about obviously that his dad being in the management. And I think in a way that puts him under more pressure because that's the sort of mindset the fans have towards him. So he always has that challenge to contend with. But the fact that his teammates doing so well, there's a lot more pressure on the lad. He knows that his seat is probably safe, but it doesn't mean that he isn't critiquing himself about his own form. So he knows he needs to turn it around a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Let's obviously round this up with the final few teams. Now, obviously, the last race has really changed the perspective this season for Williams. Of course, Williams in George Russell's hands, very, very good, solid qualifier. That doesn't need to be said. He was in Q2 for every single race except for Hungary, and he was even in Q3 at Silverstone. Ironically, of course, not appearing in Q2 in Q1 in qualifying for the Hungarian Grand Prix ended up resulting in him getting his first points of the season. And of course, Nicholas Latifi, his teammate, who had been equally looking to try and get his first points for the team, ends up scoring big points as well, to the point, as I said before, if Seb's penalty is upheld, they have 10 championship points, and that's insane. And you probably could argue again that this could be the result that gives Williams at least P8 in the Constructors' Championship over their rivals Alfa Romeo and Haas.
I think given the performances that George has put in, I think Williams deserve this. Williams do deserve it given the efforts that have been put in. The car hasn't been good enough. The car still isn't good enough for a team of that size. But yeah, with the equipment that they got, I think George has been fantastic. Latifi, like we haven't. Yeah, he hasn't had a chance really to be in the spotlight. He's finally got it. It's just interesting how we've been calling for George to get his point. We've always been thinking about George. Latifi's always been an afterthought, but yet Latifi's beaten George and got the most points for the team. So amazing for him. It's been a very interesting week for Williams. After we had that, and then we had the whole incident surrounding Dan Ticktum leaving as well over the remarks made on a Twitch stream over Latifi. So it's been an interesting week for Williams, to say the least.
Yeah, it certainly has. And obviously a lot to look forward to the second half of the season, and perhaps, a big focus on next season. Yeah, you mentioned Dan Tickton. That was a really strange one because I'd heard
Wasn't
about
it?
that. Apparently, according to Dan, of course, on his Instagram, he mentioned that he'd obviously been speaking about next season, and apparently, according to him, there wasn't an option for him to drive in Formula One next season, so he felt it was better to part ways, and that was the main reason, rather than the comments that were made about Nicholas Latifi on his Twitch stream later on. Again, it could be a related thing or something. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate because it's not really, it's not really for me to speculate, really, and I'm sure, best of luck for Dan Tickton, whatever he decides to do. Maybe Formula One might not be for him, and maybe he'll thrive and succeed in another series. I certainly hope he does in whatever he decides to do, because he's a very talented race driver, and that's the most important thing, of course. So yeah, obviously Williams, things are going great for them. The rest of the season, of course, it almost is a bit of a free hit for them. They can try, and with all respect to Alfa Romeo, I'd be very surprised if, unless we have another race, like we did at Hungary, I'll be surprised in what Alfa Romeo do. But I think for them, they'll be kind of looking at the Hungarian Grand Prix as a missed opportunity, because, of course, you had Williams doing so well, but they'll be scratching their heads thinking, where on earth were their drivers? I know Kimi got a point in that race because of Vettel's penalty, but even then, a team that's been on the fringes of the points all season were not able to take advantage when it kind of presented itself to them on a silver platter, whereas Williams took it with both hands. So what do Alfa Romeo do for the rest of the season? How can they sum up their first half, and what do they do? Because it was looking good until Hungary.
I think Alfa Romeo probably are doing the most head scratching out of every team on a grid right now, not only about their performance and where they're going to be next season, but also the future of their drivers. There's a possibility that neither of their drivers could be around next season, and it's a bad time for that to happen as well, given that there's big regulation changes. You do need that experience. You need that, particularly when it comes to development. That's going to be a big miss if they lose both of their drivers, and let's say hypothetically speaking, they're replaced by a couple of F2 drivers. The development's going to be a real issue for that team. But I think there's a lot of head scratching going on Alfa Romeo right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've been hearing rumors in the driver market. Of course, we're going to be discussing that in our transfer special at the weekend for the next episode next week. But it could be that, based on what we're seeing so far, that Alfa Romeo may be looking at other drivers. I know they've been doing a lot of testing. Teo Porcher did a test with the Alfa Romeo car at Hungary. Even Maherve Ranganathan even got a run in that, although I don't expect him to be in Formula One. I think he was driving a 2019 car. It was a real shock to see that on social media. I'm not surprised, but I was surprised, I should say. But yeah, absolutely mental. We'll have to wait and see how that transpires, but certainly work for Alfa Romeo to do if they're going to beat Williams in the second half of the season. And maybe they will need a Hungary-like race to try and find another opportunity to get some points. Rounding this review up for all of the teams, Courtney, we now with Haas, a team that obviously put literally next to no effort in their 2021 car with respect. They basically just made it to comply with the rules. They said they weren't going to develop it much, other than some parts that were homologated from last season that could go on the car that were within the regulations. Since then, of course, they've had two rookie drivers in Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher, the F2 champion from last season. And, they haven't scored any points. They're the only team so far this season that haven't scored any points. I think the best finish was 13th at the Baku Grand Prix for Mick Schumacher. With that all being said, would you say that they'd be relatively happy this season? Because I think other than one or two occasions, both cars have finished the races. So at least in terms of fulfilling sponsorship requirements and getting as much exposure as possible for their, whoever's funding the team, that's not a bad thing, especially when the focus is primarily on next season.
Yeah, I think Mick Schumacher in particular will be happy with his performances overall. He's had a couple of iffy races, but I think the fact that he was having battles with the likes of Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, be it a wounded Max Verstappen. I reckon he would have enjoyed that. He performed quite well in Hungary, and that would have given the team, those battles would have given the team sponsors plenty of exposure. So they would have definitely got what they wanted out of that. But yeah, I think Haas probably more than anybody have had their minds firmly on 2022, and I think they needed to in order to survive. Because they need to be more competitive going into next season. But I think they'll definitely be happy with Mick in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nikita Mazepin hasn't been too bad, to be honest. I know he had a bit of a shaky start. Of course, that spin after a few corners at Bahrain, which was more meme material than anything else as far as the F1 community was concerned. But even he himself could probably look back on this first half of the season with some pride. He has been improving. You could say with Mick Schumacher that, there have been elements to his driving that obviously he has improved on since his F2 days. I think one area he would like to focus on and improve on is not crashing the car at every other free practice session. Obviously, whilst this team is focusing primarily on next season, they don't want to be wasting money on fixing the car that they currently have in this cost cap era. So plenty for them to work on, but assuming that the development on next year's car goes as they expected, there could be a real focal point in the midfield next season at the very least. So hopefully their two drivers will be up for the challenge there. And given what we saw from Mick Schumacher at the Hungarian Grand Prix, he's certainly not afraid to get stuck into a battle, which was always fun to see. Obviously he was going to lose out, but it was nice to see Mick really get involved in some fights in the F1 hierarchy, if you like.
Yeah, it was. It's weird. It's weird to think that around 10 years ago you'd have had Lewis Hamilton battling with Michael Schumacher, and then there we are 10 years later seeing him battle with Michael's son. It's just interesting how life works sometimes, eh?
It really, really is. It's funny how that goes on, and who knows, if Mick Schumacher's in Formula One for long enough, we might see Kimi's son in Formula One racing alongside him in the future. You never know. Kimi's certainly hung around long enough, been in there 20 years, so it's certainly possible for Mick Schumacher to do the same. We'll just have to wait and see, as hard as that is. I guess let's round this all off with just a few last little bits. Corny, now, of course, I would have loved to have had Matt here for this last part, but of course he's a very, very busy man. But I wanted to give a rundown of our top 5 drivers this season, Corny, so far. So I'm going to ask for your top 5 this season. And who would you say has been your top 5 so far?
So I want to give George Russell a shout out. So I'm going to put him in 5th. I want to give him a shout out mainly for his qualifying performances. I think he really has been exceptional. He's got the attention this season, to be fair. He's finally getting the recognition that he deserves. So I'd like to put him in there. I want to give a shout out to Carlos Sainz as well. As I mentioned earlier on, I think he's been supreme. Going to a team like Ferrari.
Is this in order? Not to
yeah. So I'm going 5th. So I'm going 5th to 1st.
Well, you don't have to do your order if you like. You can keep it completely random.
Yeah. I want to see who else I'll put in there. Actually, I think I'll put Lando in. Yeah, Lando's definitely in there as well. Let's see who I'll put in. Yeah. Oh, Fernando Alonso as well. I want to put Fernando Alonso. I'm going to put. Yeah, I haven't really put an order here. I want to give. I think I want to put Alonso in there. Like, his comeback has been brilliant. I thought he was going to struggle. In the start it did seem that way, and it had to come back. He's been brilliant. It was brilliant to see how he performed the other day. Finally, be back in the spotlight. I think the two that have really stood out for me, I think the way that Max Verstappen has adapted to a championship battle has been. I think we all know that the guy's going to be a multiple world champion, but the way that he's taken on the challenge against Lewis has been brilliant. So he's definitely one of my top drivers. But Lando Norris for me, I think Lando Norris has been a driver of the season. He's carried that team. Daniel has struggled a bit. He's catching up. But I really am going to put Lando as a driver of the season. With the car that he has, he's ahead of Valtteri. Is he still? Yeah, he's ahead of Valtteri, isn't he still?
Yeah.
He's ahead of Valtteri Bottas in a Mercedes. Let's not forget that. He's been fantastic. So for me, Lando Norris is my driver of the season so far.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane what Lando has done this season. And I agree. I've got my list, and Lando is definitely at the top of mine. I think he's been the driver of the season so far. If Max Verstappen had a bit better fortune, and I know this isn't really a caveat that you can kind of, mark him down on, if he was leading this championship by 60, 70 points, I think you probably wouldn't be able to look any further than him. But Lando has been phenomenal. I mean, he was on a 15 race scoring streak before Hungary. He hadn't finished, I think he finished lower than 5th once this season. I think it was an 8th place finish. Trying to remember where that was actually. Just flicking through. I did prepare some notes. I usually do for these podcasts. I think it was looking, yeah. So he was 8th in Spain. I thought it was Spain. But he hasn't finished outside the top 5 once, other than that retirement where he got yeeted by Bottas, as Matt put it earlier. Max and Lewis obviously have to be there in the championship. I feel like neither of them have really done that much wrong. They've driven pretty much and to the level we expected. I think Max has certainly gone above the level we expected from Max because he's reaching new heights in his own ability. And that has been able to put him in a position where he's rivaling Lewis, who equally is driving at a very, very high level as he always is. I think we expect that from Lewis, but I think in Max, we kind of expected a lot of high level performances, but we were just sort of wondering, could he handle the pressure and in situations where he's expected to win? And so far he has done to a large degree. So he's definitely in there. Charles Leclerc, I've put in there. Now, I know, a lot of people will say, oh, well, Carlos Sainz has had him in the championship. And yes, that's true. But as I said, like Matt said earlier, I completely agree with him that Charles has had moments this season where he's been very unlucky not to win. He's got a few pole positions, which have come out of nowhere. And the British Grand Prix really, I think, showed a lot of people how good Charles Leclerc really is. And sometimes we get that reminder of it. Hopefully we'll get that more often if he's in a much more competitive car. But I think Leclerc has been phenomenal so far this season. And Fernando Alonso has to be in that list. I mean, Fernando Alonso was kind of teetering on the top 5 for me this season. I was unsure whether to put him in there or perhaps Sainz or Gasly. But after that performance at Hungary, completely won me over as to whether or not the old Fernando was back. He's certainly probably not going to be the Fernando of 2006 when he was a double world champion, or perhaps in his peak when he was at Ferrari. But yeah, he certainly is still driving to incredibly high level, and I absolutely love to see it. So Fernando definitely in the top 5. I don't think there's really much more we can add, Corny. Have you got any final words before we sign off?
Great first half of the season, and I'm yes, it's great to have somebody like Matt Gallagher speak to us. Not really something you can just casually say, oh, yeah, it's had a conversation with Formula One with Matt Gallagher. So yeah, what a season, eh? What a season so far.
He has, yeah. I mean, we try not to fanboy too much because I know that sounds a bit weird for a podcast, but I think it's fair to say that, we kind of started this because of obviously content creators like himself, and obviously we had Aldous on that, these guys, they inspire us so much to want to be a part of that and create our own content as well. And in a weird way, for that to come full circle and to have a guest on like Matt is pretty special. And Aldous, of course, very, very special guest as well. So that's really, really cool for us. Yeah, hopefully long may that continue. I'm hoping that's not the only time that we have them on the show. I'm pretty sure we'll be able to get them on again in the future, but of course, very, very busy people. And of course, more guests like that are coming. We have got another guest lined up on this weekend's recording that we're going to be doing the transfer special. So definitely look out for that. I'm not expecting a massive silly season, but I know there's plenty of stories definitely doing the rounds in the paddock. So we're definitely going to have to get in on that before it all sorts of kicks off. So we'll have to see you for that one, guys. But of course, if you have enjoyed this episode, the 100th episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Of course, if you are listening in on your favorite podcasting platform, please consider following us. And thank you so much for your support. And of course, I'll leave a link below to the WTF1 channel now, over 800,000 subscribers, of course, with Matt Gallagher featuring as the lead presenter, doing an incredible job there himself. Tom and Katie as well with the WTF1 podcast. Really definitely recommend giving those guys a follow and subscribe to them. Of course, help them get to 1 million. I mean, that would be pretty cool. I don't think I've seen a F1 channel, or at least an independent brand channel that's associated with F1 get to 1 million subscribers before. So that's going to be pretty cool, as they will probably eventually be the first, if not one of the first. So that'd be quite cool, seeing a gold play button for an F1 related YouTube channel. Not quite ours, but hopefully, you never know. We may get there one day. Who knows? Yeah,
I think what they've done for the F1 community is great. Like Matt said himself, didn't he, about how with football fans, there's so many football fans about, so it's easy to resonate. But with Formula One, sometimes if you don't have people in your social circle not many are really into Formula One. So it's really good that they've found a way for F1 fans to connect, really. And, you know, and the F1 community is I find it to be, you know, an open-minded, a generally friendly community. And it's good that, you know, channels like WTF1 give these people a chance to meet, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely love that about them as well. And, you know, you're absolutely right. I think this is the best part of making this content, is that it allows us, of course, not on the same scale as them, but it allows us to engage with so many people and talk about the sport that we all love and share with a passion that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do through any other mediums. And, you know, I always think that's really understated and it doesn't get said enough. So, of course, anyone who has checked out our content in the past, we really, really appreciate you guys. Whether you've loved it or whether you've not really been keen on it, we've always appreciated everybody's support. And we just hope that, you know, again, this is like a bit of a springboard for us to be able to attract new followers and new listeners and new people to engage with our content. But of course, guys, please do keep it civil in the comment section. I think that goes without saying, but please do keep it civil. But until then, guys, of course, it's time for us to sign off. So thanks so much for tuning in. Please stay safe. And until next time, we will see you in the DNF1 F1 podcast. Take care.
See you soon.